Как его ноги. А у всех так. Все красиво, правильно.
Так. Добрий день.
So once again, good afternoon. Thankfully, the air alarm was not a long one. We announced the main topic of our session, which is improving coordination of our actions of the partnership between us and international partners, the national partners. The speakers in this session will be telling about their experience, about their know-how and their recommendations and how they managed over this time or the previous year and this year to coordinate their work, their partnership, and maybe give us some recommendations. And the first panelist will be Nazar Tanasishin, advisor to the Minister of Social Policy. So Nazar, the Ministry of Social Policy, the way we see it, is one of the main, I would say, stakeholders who need to get busy with coordinating humanitarian aid in our country. So the question to you, how do you see, what is the role that the government has to play in this current situation, the situation of war? Are there any mechanisms in your ministry that are already working in coordination or developing something? Maybe you can announce some new tools that will help our humanitarian community and civil society to with this. So thank you for everybody. I would like to express my great appreciation and respect for everything you do. Responding to the question, the Ministry of Social Policy is the main agency that shapes our state policy in humanitarian aid. And our main objective is not to harm. Therefore, when we are shaping the new policy in humanitarian aid, our approach is to maximize, to not to over-regulate the civil society and humanitarian sector. And I would like to take this opportunity to report maybe to you where we're moving and what are the tools that we have already that we can announce and what we can showcase in the future. I'll give a short update on 3 areas. First is humanitarian aid as a whole. We as a ministry that is shaping this policy, we decided to go away from the existing arrangement that existed before the large-scale invasion. You probably know that before the large-scale invasion, the system of recognition of humanitarian aid required a package of document to be adopted, a work group to be appointed, a separate procedure. So a huge period of time that is just spent doing bureaucratic clearance and procedure. If we live in the digital age, why do we need to lose so much time in that bureaucracy? So that's why we try to use the principle of declaration, the transparency and speed of decision making. We implemented an automated registration of humanitarian aid. What does it mean? It means that it's a software package using web interface. You enter the site, you register as the beneficiary of humanitarian assistance, but among the categories of beneficiaries, there are some subcategories of legal entities, the NGOs, charity funds, etc. Automatically, you register as a beneficiary, not the way it was before. So the state liberalizes your status of beneficiary when you as soon as you register in the system. Then using the digital tools, you don't no longer need to collect all these lengthy letters and the letters of approval. You enter the basic info about the cargo that is about to enter into Ukraine, and we would like to very much establish harmonize our cooperation with the customs authority. That's so far is the biggest gap, a quick exchange of data between us and them. So we want the declaration that is now filled out during as at the cargo entry into the country should be filled out electronically. It can be filled out through the mobile phone, the smartphone, and then the customs agency can see this cargo entering in Ukraine. So that's a understandable and clear and transparent tool that is self-explanatory. We suggest several other steps subsequently that are intended for civil military administrations, because the biggest issues in terms of control now is to the military civilian administrations and how they should distribute humanitarian aid. And then inventory description. Turns out on the way from the customs to the warehouse of military civilian administration, certain cargoes can disappear, and which initially went through entry point with declaration. Then the point of fixation should be inventory description. Another point should be the distribution report. And distribution report is where the state should not control specifically who is the physical person that it reaches with the identification number or a copy of passport or anything, because in the current reality we need to expedite and do the quick distribution of the humanitarian assistance within the organization. Of course, the donors will require that. On the national level, it's enough for us to understand what is the region where humanitarian aid was distributed. Why do we need that? Because we will have at least some analytics understanding what are the points that the cargo is distributed, and so that will help us as a bulky and a slow mechanism to quicker understand where the volunteers bringing what and then respond later. But that's about analytics. So reforming the procedure of how humanitarian aid is entering the country and recognized, that's the first step we'll be working on. So the decree on this procedure is now at the final approval stage at the Ministry of Justice. We hope very much that in the nearest months, the cabinet ministers will adopt that. And then within a month, the electronic system starts working, because again, this is a technical solution that requires a lot of approval stages and technical approval. And then predictably, but I will be cautious regarding with the launch date, maybe somewhere by the end of March, the system will be fully operational. It's going to work first as a pilot stage, or is it going to be production workable system? Yeah, it's going to be workable system production, and we will call it. We will use some alternative channels if it blackouts or software interventions. We will continue keeping the paper trail, but we want to digitize it as much as possible to make it public and convenient and expedited, at least for the time of war. Then and it's going to be mandatory. It's going to be the only method to do it. So basically, based on the results of testing of the system, we'll be able to conclude, and we hope that it will start working soon, but we still don't have a final answer. This solution most probably is going to be part of the concept of the new law on humanitarian aid, which for the peaceful time will foresee the similar, well, this exact digital solution may be modified a little bit and adapted to a certain degree. And that is the first step. I understand that we can talk as a separate block on this specific subtopic alone, but I will try and cover some other tools that we have. Second one is e-assistance, Yet Допомога. So it's a tool that maybe some of you have heard, but we're very proud of it. And other than it's a digital solution that is recognized and collected several digital rewards in computer industry, basically it's the best tool to coordinate monetary transfers from international donors. Why? Because the biggest question, most of the questions that we receive from different international donors is not to duplicate humanitarian assistance. If the same beneficiary or same IDP, like in Lviv, have received some monetary assistance, we need to make sure they won't receive the similar or the same assistance from another donor the next day. So that's why we're not trying to monopolize everything, but we need to make it as utilitarian as possible. And the procedure itself, I don't know whether we should delve real deep into the mechanics of all that, but it looks very simple. When we just recently had a visit to New York, and even on the UN committee, we explained in a couple of words the whole mechanism. So the international donor comes in, selects who are the category of beneficiaries they're ready to do this cash transfers. Through the electronic system, they go to the Ministry of Social Policy. They give us the database of verified persons from our corroborated state-owned database who should be a recipient, who not. The donor is doing the transfer. Ministry of Social Policy is reporting, and no duplication here at all. And it's as transparent as it can be, a digital procedure. We position this product as the main coordinational tool, if we put it that way. Can I ask a question? How international organizations will be participating in this project? How will they be added? Everything through web interface. You can follow the website on this link or this QR code. If the international organization, if they want, yeah, of course, if they want. This is the voluntary principle. We don't shape this policy the way humanitarian policy is shaped. So it's the tool that is convenient for donors, not only for us as a state. We don't interfere here. We thank the donors for being ready to add these transfers to add to the humanitarian aid assistance. So, okay, we're doing everything we can. We designed the digital tool to verify beneficiaries, so you're very much welcome to use it. Another question: is this a direct assistance to a particular beneficiary or an organization that will later distribute? It's a person, but it should be added that the platform itself has several sub-chapters. And one of them is direct transfers from donors. Another is peer-to-peer transfer. If other than individuals, donors, and charity funds abroad want to connect directly, so the system connects them. I would like to bring some analogy, but it's like a classic peer-to-peer, but in charity. Understandable. And the third tool we have updated, and I would like to showcase it, is a humanitarian account. You probably know about the virtual accounts that were created from the very start of the large-scale invasion at the National Bank. The Ministry of Social Policy also opened this kind of account, and it received money from the charity donors from all over the world, and then redistributed by particular areas. The areas were very generally outlined, mostly to counter or to recover from the consequences of Russian aggression. So through the central procurement organization, we would like to have the transparent way with broadcast of the committee's meetings, with all the reports and audits, engaging international auditor companies to distribute the funds that will land on this special account at the Ministry of Social Policy, breaking down in 4 specific areas. First is rehabilitation tools. I won't call them prosthetics, but to generalize them a little bit for this conversation. So especially when it's about the wounded warriors or the military who need specialized technical rehabilitation equipment, like bionic prosthetics. You probably heard that there are high-tech prosthetic technologies that are super expensive right now. Unfortunately, the state cannot fund it, even though the state fully covers these prosthetics, but the one that costs 250 or 25,000 euros, well, that it cannot cover. So this humanitarian pillar provides prosthetics which not only of specific technology, we want to invite these people for cooperation and form the actual need for a specific person who needs this prosthetic, to show the donors, look, here's a specific person that needs a specific bionic prosthetic, such and such. The amount of such and such should be fundraised. And then we report, we have fundraised such and so, we have provided this and that. So this cycle is closed, let's move over to the next person. So that's why we're doing the targeted cases. Why? Because we've heard these requests from the charity organizations and from donors. You probably know, or you've seen such problems where people, so the communities raise money for rehabilitation, but we don't know what's the number of people rehabilitated through these funds. What are the things procured for these funds? So we want to have this process as convenient as possible for those who don't want to themselves deal into all the nitty-gritty. We will help you understand the whole process and see every stage of this process. So next area, which is more general but no less important, is the possibility to have to allocate residential houses for family type orphanages, because there are families who lost their houses because of the Russian aggression, and we want to provide housing to them. But it's a complex project that we put slightly less prioritized than the prosthetics project. Another thing is social rehabilitation, decompression of the former military who returned from active service. That is needed right now in huge scale. So we will raise funds for psychological rehabilitation. I won't go into more detail right now because this project has certain limitations in terms of disclosure of personal data. As for additional payments for social workers, it is pretty much self-explanatory, but it's a slightly lower priority in our pipeline. Is where we allocate additional funds for agencies and public institutions who need additional social workers because they're overworked, so burnt out, like in the regions where there are more IDPs than before or who never had such needs and social help.
Можете знайти
Once again, you can find all of the contact details following this QR code on our website. So we encourage you to use these two methods. Then, of course, none of us is going to have another choice. So we want to make it as user-friendly as we can. Thank you. Thank you for your responses. I understand all of these tools are already functional, so we can go on the site of the ministry and begin to check them. If we have any questions to Mr. Nazar, would you kindly ask them because he needs to be excused? If it's not, very critical for you to ask your questions, so let us please carry on, shall we? Whose question is more important, do you think? Just because I have a mic in my hand, so let it be me. My question one, who is a verified member to obtain this help? Are these only IDPs? Are these people from occupied territories? That's question one. And question two, what is the role of the civil society for the second and third mechanisms? Are you planning to involve civil activists for consultations? Thank you for your questions. Concerning verifications, the government can verify only IDPs. That's why you're right. These are special migrants with special status. And with reference to your question two, first off, we are as open as we can in terms of communication with the civil society. Perhaps it's difficult to communicate because we cannot enjoy it. We don't enjoy trust on your part, unfortunately, but it's necessary for me to get across to you that personally, I am pretty new to this system. So this bureaucracy hasn't become an intrinsic part of me. So please hold out. Yes, thank you. I will. But they say this period doesn't last long. So would you kindly take use of them? And I'm very open to any discussions, to any communications, along with my teammates. And we would like to implement a lot of other tools with the help of the civil society actors, borrow different experiences from international sectors in terms of methodologies, in terms of how it all works. Because the state, the government, how it works, it usually plans certain forms and they're distracted from social relations. There are certain rules set in play and then nobody needs that. And the approach, even in terms of shaping this automated humanitarian aid distribution, is to understand all of the pains and aches of the humanitarian sector, not to regulate that overly, but to create additional helpful mechanisms to do away with these pains. Is that all? Yes, thank you. So we suggest that we carry on.
Just before he leaves, that's confusing. Nicholas from Refugees International. I just would like to hear, because there is often concern outside, especially by governments and countries that contribute to Ukraine and the resistance against the Russian invasion, the full-scale invasion. Just if you can explain on the issue of corruption, aid diversion, what is the government doing to ensure that this problem is tackled or is addressed as best as possible, if you can? Thank you.
Дякую за запитання. Я, напевно, буду українською.
Thank you very much. I'll probably answer in Ukrainian so that everybody understands me. The question is really rankling. It's painful. I will be, of course, replying through the perspective of my own background and experience. But what we are trying to implement, and something that I have just demonstrated to you, these are the tools to tackle, to combat corruption everywhere where digitalization is in place and public openness. No corruption can stand that. So any working groups on recognition of someone or something where if there are any ladies or gentlemen that can be impacted, it's a bad mechanism, but anything closed, which isn't demonstrated or made public online, is a bad mechanism. These are perhaps the most fundamental things that one should start with combating corruption. In addition, we are trying to implement right now, if we dig deeper into the detail, within our ministry, we are initiating anti-corruption audit. We are going through this audit with reference to all internal mechanisms within the ministries to make sure that we prevent influence in terms of redistribution illegally. We try to do away with this problem, and I think that we are trying to uproot it and very successfully at that. At the level of the government, of course, we will try to scale up our experience. And of course, we'll be taking it further up. But the main emphasis, of course, is that digital tools, publicity, openness, transparency are the things that we can already launch and avail ourselves of. Another question, if I may, how do these digital tools can apply to people of older age, senior citizens, if they don't have smartphones, because it's a substantial number of people who have lost their homes and money, even to obtain a smart telephone. Thank you very much. A very good point. When talking about nationwide areas that will be implemented with the help of DIA portal, maybe this will be more topical and relevant, but now we are talking about specific digital tools that have their own beneficiaries in the civil society sector. Okay, keep going, please. I will have to speak a bit later, but I would like to take this opportunity to talk to you. I'm a representative of the National Assembly of People with Disabilities. With the help of the UN agency, Inclusive, we have monitored some information sources and EDIA, and it turns out that a great number of people with disabilities and senior people cannot access this resource. So monetary, pecuniary assistance cannot come to them. This is something I'm going to talk about. The people who are based in villages and rural areas, IDPs with disabilities who are senior people, they cannot access this platform. A great number of people who cannot see, visually impaired, that cannot see these visual materials, not only on this platform, but other humanitarian organizations working in Ukraine. So there's a great layer of people who are left astray without any humanitarian assistance whatsoever. If I may, I would like to comment. Well, in fact, digitalization and its issues are about the fact that before you enter something into an e-system, you have to digitalize an incredible amount of paper documents. If we talk about a centralized bank, then paper documents, the statuses of these people on the paper, that's something that has to be digitalized first. Therefore, some inconveniences may arise, including the categories of the population you've just named. But we cannot do this overnight. This is not an instantaneous process. It's a multi-resource solution, gradual one that we are trying to implement bit by bit. It's just the early beginning. Yes, it's a lot of heavy work. It's not just the beginning, it's an ongoing work, big massives of information. It's not something that we are declaring, we are already doing. We have laid our hands on it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to excuse myself. Thank you very much for your answers. We very much hope to keep in touch with you so that all organizations can always reach out to the ministry. While you are not turned into a bureaucrat yet. Thanks a lot. Now we get on with our session, coordination, and with our panelists. It's something that we discuss. Next, it's Daria Kasyanova, Program Director of International Organization SOS, Children's Platform. They fight for children's rights. As I understand, Daria, you have some 299 different organizations and funds. My question to you is, how do you get coordinated? What challenges have you been faced with over this time? Are there any solutions? Do you have any recommendations that you would like to share? Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Let me start by saying that we began our coordination before February 24th last year. We established our network for children's rights. It was back in March 2014 without thinking about any wars, and multiple partners who are right now members of this all-Ukrainian network for the children's rights back in 2014 and 2015 would help the families with children to get evacuated from Lugansk and Donetsk oblasts and region. And we helped a lot of orphanages and boarding houses. So we have a lot of valuable experience. And back in December 2021, we reached out as a nationwide network to our Ukrainian government and to everyone responsible for the well-being of the children with the respective letter. What we said that we require to have this nationwide coordination council to plan how we could evacuate our children if we had to protect that. Of course, I mean orphanages, I mean family type orphanages, families with children with disabilities, families with many children. So we had that experience prior to the beginning of the war, and therefore we proposed our help. And on Monday, we had a meeting back in February. And on Thursday, this was the commencement of the war, full-scale invasion. We had a meeting with UNICEF representatives, the Ministry of Social Policy representatives, of the Ombudsman on Human Rights and Children's Rights, and we suggested looking at the map of this aggression. We wanted to make this map. It was a methodology of forecasting to understand how many children were in need and how many volunteering organizations and civil society organizations would be willing to help us. They would say, don't panic, it's not so scary, everything will be all right. But we know what happened then, what ensued. And of course, some establishments, some institutions were greatly helped by us. Our partners were helping us enormously. We were helping orphanages and family type orphanages. You can imagine with children of up to 10 children, we would help them to get out of Mariupol, Kharkiv region, other regions of Ukraine. But it's true. There were multiple families, numerous children who unfortunately remained in occupation, like in Kherson region. You probably know about that. So let me tell you about our coordination, which was in 3 areas. First of all, coordination with local organizations. We had several chat boxes, about chatbots maybe. These were some 300 organizations, local, volunteering ones, and other ones joining them to understand how and where they were operating and what help they might need. This was the first layer or the first area. The second layer was at the level of international organizations and public organizations of national level with good budgets that knew their plans well enough in some foreseeable future, like a week or a month at least. It was important. We coordinated them amongst them because we knew that they were looking for some partners who were ready to cover their funding, like our children's town or camp began to be funded by public associations, which dealt with evacuations. Everyone knew who they were because they were helping and hosting people coming to the Transcarpathia, to the west of Ukraine, to Lviv. So this was something like a matrix building out. And the third level of coordination was when we began to engage with some authorities, government authorities and agencies. I mean, on the 25th of February last year, there was a special headquarters set up for the protection of children in the conditions of war. UNICEF joined it as one of the very important international partners, our all-Ukrainian network, and the representatives of line ministries who deal with children rights. And on a daily basis, we would get together in order to plan our activities and operations to see what was going on and see how we could be helping both the children and their families. As for the problems with coordinations that we were seeing, From day one, it was difficult to understand who was responsible for what was going on, because the people were trying to escape. People were trying to protect their families, and they couldn't prepare any qualitative project submissions. I remember myself writing one in a bomb shelter in Irpin town, but still it worked. And on the March 4th, together with UNICEF, which is our partner, in launching a hot phone line, which we launched last year, in March last year, meant for families with children and social workers. And as case managers, we began to help those individuals to get evacuated, to help them with temporary shelters, help them with the mental care, humanitarian aid. This was also one of the ways to analyze needs region-wise and the potential of volunteering and social organizations working in this area. Also, together, we would plan and detect the cases when our children would remain in occupied territories and sometimes deported to Russia or the occupied Donetsk and Lugansk regions. So concerning the challenges, maybe they still remain relevant. As a public sector, we engage in a lot of useful things, but it seems like we all do the same at the same time in the same territories. And we find out about that once we launch our full operations, like a mobile group of MHPSS. We come to a community and we see a similar brigade already working. And somehow this mapping that is responsible for making clusters and subclusters that are meant to help us to coordinate are failing. And with reference to challenges, the representative of the Ministry of Social Policy has just told us the same. I think that the request for assistance and coordination should be issued by the Ministry of Social Policies if we talk about children and families and those who work with this target population. Next, we can get coordinated going down, understanding that there is a request on behalf of the Ministry of Social Policies, and we can truly differentiate between the territories that we work in, capacities of the organizations that are engaged there, and strengthen these capacities. Of course, there are challenges. We try to coordinate amongst ourselves, but it's very difficult to forecast. So is your opinion true that the Ministry of Social Policies should commission all of this? For instance, if we talk about evacuation. Well, for example, right now there is a very important discussion going on concerning evacuating families or children without parental care, like in Bakhmut. We keep talking about that. We have been talking about that for some 9 years, whether we can or cannot do it, whether it's allowed or not, and what public organizations and public associations can give us as recommendations in this regard. Understanding of what the problem is all about is something that the Ministry of Social Policy should possess, because they have different services for children care. They understand it much better. Our NGOs see it, but we'd see it from another perspective. Well, family type orphanages or foster families. We see numerous organizations and international partners inclusive who see as a focus of their organization only family type orphanages, but where there is a family composed of one mom with a child, don't seem to belong to any groups of assistance. We have seen such examples. And it's very important that the Ministry of Social Policy, or at least this ministry together with the other ones, process such cases, and after that, put down this information to our level, and then we would engage together with them and help them should they need that. Thank you. So the ministry has to chair, spearheaded. It has to provide its own request and commission that, how to evacuate people, for instance, and coordinate that around the Ministry of Social Policies. No, it's not like that. Let's put it this way. Our children's towns and our nationwide network for the rights of children. We have some organizations which is called, for instance, responsible citizens, one of them, like Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson regions, when they get the people out of these hostile territories. The children, for instance, who have been deported to Russia. In what way can we help the government to get the children back? We can. However, we need to know the information about if these children have parents, if those parents haven't been rid of parental rights, if the parents have died, and we have numerous cases like that, if there are any legal representatives or kins of these children, relations, and we would help them with the documents to go to Russia to get the children back. There are some functions that public associations or NGOs cannot perform. When we talk about minimal standards of child protection in the circumstances of war, some standards that we have to adhere to. These are very complicated, comprehensive processes. And when we, as a donor, are approached by an organization who can do it, we will also be requiring from them to explain how and on what grounds they will be doing what they are promising to do. So these are interesting professional things, I would say. But I'd say that sometimes we lack time to think about it, to give it a thought, because we have to help people here and now.
So we continue. Larissa Baida is here with us. National Assembly, people with disabilities. It's a similar topic with the previous one. So the improvement of coordination between humanitarian organizations or those organizations and the government. Maybe access to information and resources, or what other recommendations you might have? So I want to tell you about our experience from the very first day of the large-scale war. The National Assembly is the union created by people with disabilities. All of our organizations and its members are the users of humanitarian aid from those organizations who are present here. We work since 2014, and we've been discussing the same scope of issues. After 2014, we learned a lot of positive things, although the situation were critical, and we realized that we need to amend the law. So I won't say that this law is fully implemented. It's more declaration, as the events of last year actually showed, because we talked about bomb shelters, evacuation that we lived through 2014, where the whole railway cars of people were evacuated, shelters, etc. So what this experience have given us. Second day of the large-scale warfare, we addressed international organizations, UNHCR, the Committee on People with Disabilities, to support us in the situation where we see is happening in Ukraine. And, you know, we did the right thing, because those organizations, those international European Forum of People with Disability, International Alliance of People with Disabilities, the UN committees and international organizations, more than 200 basically responded to our letter. Why is it important? For 4 months in Ukraine, we couldn't find a donor who would provide assistance to organizations. I told you that we have a very specific target groups, people who cannot see, people who are using wheelchairs, people with psychosocial disturbances, parents of children with disabilities. And when the international donor tells me, you know, we are providing to you 100 rations, 100 food packages for the Sumy region, we think that they will provide us addressed or targeted No, we need to collect all that from the warehouses 100 kilometers away, distribute it to people because people cannot leave their houses the way it was in Kharkiv during the shelling, where was a big group of blind people there who were completely disoriented in space. And all of that assistance was provided by the head of our Kharkiv organization, who is blind himself, with the only person with eyesight was his driver. Is it possible? Is the small local organization capable of doing that? Of course, thanks to the international resources, we have the organization people with disabilities have managed to hold on for these 4 months. So what we've done in over this time, sometimes they call us the national cluster because we are working in all the regions. Even before the war, we had been. So we were more than 100 before, now only about 70 of them. You know that the situation is changing because of the war. But our organization said that we are different in the way that we already have the know-how. We know things. We know how to accompany these people. When we provided recommendations how to meet and care about them on the railway stations. We knew what were the technical requirements for bomb shelters. We did the audits of accessibility for bomb shelters. And in Kyiv, on Kyiv map, we have pinpointed them. There's an open access map of Kyiv with shelters, and you can see only singular of these shelters are adapted for people with disabilities. It's an open map. Over the time, with the support of CBN International and European Disability Forum, we have conducted the studies in Ukraine in terms of, about providing monetary assistance to people with disabilities. The partners have recommended to us that we work in clusters. We started working, and the most active work is in the work group on disabilities and people and elderly people in the protection cluster. You can see on the page there about 60 surveys in English and Ukrainian. Surveys on monetary help, the recommendation on the availability of shelters with accessibility. We have prepared all the materials for organizations working in Ukraine. No matter how we talked on all levels, how important the monetary help for our target group is, but we've seen that in these kind of issues, we're still talking with different languages with other stakeholders. Although there are many donors are already in Ukraine. So if you look at the website of Cluster of Cash Assistance, you see that cash assistance has been given to more than 5 million Ukrainians. And I'm asking the question, as an organization who is caring about the target group, how many of these 4 million are the people with disabilities and the elderly? Well, nobody can give me an answer. At the same time, donors we work with ask the statistics from us, which is the right thing to do. It's a classics of humanitarian aid: the age, the gender, and possible disability. But when it's about food items, non-food items, rehabilitation means, technical means, we are always saying how many people with disabilities have been eligible and received it in Ukraine. The second thing I would like to point your attention to: people with disabilities are not homogeneous. We're all with different disabilities, different deficiencies. So when the first months the food items were arriving, we said there are people who cannot eat bread. They are diabetics. Just as we had on the catering today, everything was very tasty, but have we accounted for the needs of all the people who are present here? People who don't eat macaroni but because of sugar, diabetes. People with special food requirements. Of course, we were happy to receive any assistance. We could exchange the humanitarian aid we didn't need, but others need. Why the IDPs also distribute non-food items? You know, most of the people are economically challenged. $50 per month is the basic income for such homesteads. How can they provide for themselves, make a living? And through our survey, through the lobby, we started saying that that cash assistance has to be provided to all people with disabilities, not just IDPs with disabilities. It has to be paid, and there should be a clear reporting on document trail whom we provided cash assistance and who we didn't. Our goal is to cover all the people in need, whether they are in rural or urban area or the mountains or in Sumy where there's still shelling going on. And then the blackouts, the system malfunctioning, the people of 60 plus age, not all of them have smartphones and computer. So a lot of people were outside of this cash assistance and that many people received. When these, codes started arriving, like follow this QR code, and we had a avalanche of requests. How we can do that. We had 1,500 requests in 2 weeks. What is the staffing we need to process all them? So we printed them out. We keep printing them so that we have a paper trail. And we had Terry Brown working with us. She's an advisor at the UNHCR. And she said, I will collect this folder. These are great cases for those organizations who are dealing with humanitarian assistance. That's why my proposal, in order to improve coordination on the level of clusters existing in Ukraine, that's first thing. How can we improve from our point of view? Don't feel shy and contact us. We can update you on what disabilities are so that you don't have to invent the bicycle as a new understanding. Don't need to create new platforms. There are more than enough in Ukraine. Let's coordinate what we already have. And second proposal, let's work on the local authorities. I won't tell you for which cluster, but people calling me and say, we want to invite your organizations to participate. I say, no problem, but you should know that in this region, there are 4 organizations and people using wheelchairs. They say, we cannot do that. We don't have accessibility in our venue. I say, well, we cannot then as well. So people with no eyesight cannot have access to your information. You all know there are still UN representatives here in the room that there are recommendations on guidelines on web content that all the countries should adhere to. We have created a website, we created a portal which uses simple language, and my other organizations don't adhere to these recommendations. That means that a big number of organizations don't have this information. So our secretariat in Kyiv on the neighbor street, you're all invited to our office, and all the local organizations, they have to call us so that we can extract information and then give it to them in accessible formats. That's an additional work in this difficult time. That's why a third proposal, in order to coordinate our activity, the information has to be accessible in a simple and understandable, clear language, and several alternative formats. Let me go back to the cash assistance. If you yourself see how many agencies, international institutions in Ukraine provide cash assistance, we counted more than 19. So how can a simple person find their way and navigate them? Somewhere in the early summer, we found a way out. We invited the volunteer organizations who work in the villages and rural areas so that we trusted those people, and we needed them to work with elderly, with people with disabilities, to help them fill out the templates and surveys, because those people were in a difficult material situation. And it worked, but we cannot cover all of Ukraine and all of the rural areas and the people who have no access to technical means. So we should think about that, accessibility of information and its availability. Another important thing, everything's changing. And if UN standards or humanitarian aid are obsolete, well, they have to be amended. We cannot use the standards that were prepared, beautifully prepared, but for the African countries. You know, we have this funny story where they sent here blankets that are cooling blankets, and they're not warming blankets because they were intended for African countries, or flashlights that only recharge through small solar batteries. We don't have that much sunlight because those were intended for African countries again. So again, we have to talk the same language in terms of disabilities. We want shelters that are accessible. So we have shelters created by our organizations that have the accessibility for people with disabilities. Some organizations like Dnipro, I've seen like Ocean of Goods. That's our organization. There's about 100 people there, and you're helping very well to that shelter. We also have shelters in Vinnytsia, in Uzhgorod. They're all overloaded, overburdened. And that's why they have nowhere to move the people with disabilities on the elderly too. Just the day before yesterday, I was given an interview to the Washington Post, and they asked, "Is it true that those people are living in the hospital beds?" Yeah, because we don't have anywhere to evacuate them to. Because it's also again about accessibility of toilets and beds, etc. So we're asking humanitarian organizations who are gathered here to please think about it. We have to think a step ahead. That many people will return, but they still don't have housing. They have no shelter over their heads. So almost wrapping up. So the issue of shelters and accessibility to these shelters is super important. Another thing, there has to be flexibility. Civil society organizations, our national, international donors, and those humanitarian organizations working in Ukraine. So is it important the civilians who lost their eyesight because of war, they were provided primary medical aid, they were treated, they were sent home. And when they were sent home, you probably know that in Ukraine, there are virtually no rehabilitation services for people who lost eyesight. And it's been 4 months now that we're talking to different donors. Please support the camps for those civilians who lost their eyesight because of war. We are professional organizations. We will teach them how to cook tea, how to wash their linen, etc., how to navigate the streets, them and their families. You know, they say we cannot secure funding, but that it's talking about those people who we want to return to society, for them to find work, because we're not only consumers. Can I ask a question? So you're sending requests and you don't receive answers, or no? You know, we're very like law-abiding citizens. We were created way back when in 2001. We see as a donor request, we see that there are priorities. We start writing letters, then the donor says, "Sorry, we cannot support you." So in order to rehabilitate a person, it takes several days. They have to be taught working with the cane, teaching them to be independent again. So we consult now by hotlines, on telephone hotlines. So the situation is changing very well, very fast in Ukraine. We have to respond to the situation. In May last year, we didn't have that task. But when we how many people were affected? Civilian population. How to return them, reintegrate them to the community?
Thank you very much, Madam Larissa. This issue is most important. That's why we have allowed a bit more time to talk about it. I think that later on we will have the summary of this panel. But there is still one follow-up question that we would like to raise with you at a bit later point, and maybe you will support this initiative. Now we would like to give the floor to Madam Larissa, up to 5 minutes, if you please. Larissa Magdziuk, she is the coordinator of the NGO of Women's Consortium in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Greetings to all of the participants of today's event, all of the colleagues that I used to work with and keep working with. Basically, I was thinking to share this experience of working in the Women's Consortium during this difficult time. But having heard the previous panelists, I would like to take your permission to share my impressions and observations, perhaps take it as a kind of recommendations with reference to realigning, introducing changes and amendments into coordination in terms of providing humanitarian aid. The first thing, synergy of resources and experiences of different organizations and various people engaged in NGOs. I'm an example of such a synergy myself. And at this point, I would like to thank Sasha Galkin and the organization Right to Protection, because Right to Defense, because the first time I was confronted with such people was this organization. I was working there as a monitor. I did not have any field trips. So this was remote experience, as they say so, but still it was so valuable that when eventually in April I joined the Women's Consortium, I could apply the previous background very aptly. Thank you very much, because this organization is very much experienced. So when I joined Women's Consortium, the work in the humanitarian area in this consortium was at the very early beginning. There were some fragmentary elements of work in this respect. However, this was just on and off. Once Kyiv region was liberated, and Kyiv was deblocked, this organization had a great need to give assistance to people, and the synergy came very much in handy. Next, when coordinating, what is it that we get confronted with? It's the question where to go, who to help, how to determine first-rate groups that sorely need help. And here, coordination with local authorities helped us very much. So first we reached out to the regional authorities in Kyiv region. They were not much enthusiastic, let's be frank about it. So we decided to go directly and started dialing telephone numbers of different communities at public level, whoever knew the seniors in the senior leaders in these communities. Eventually, we ended up having a powerful network of contacts of local activists, local authorities, coordination centers, and humanitarian assistance. And this came very, very much in to our assistance, to our help when we were working both in Kyiv region and beyond. And then we scaled up this experience to other regions where we have representative offices of our Women's Consortium, where we set up our hubs. Next, it's very good when we have lists, when we are helped by local authorities compiling these lists. However, if we don't see these people, these lists can boil down to something mentioned today. They may be duplicated or not meet the realistic needs of the people, or some people can be left behind. We were faced with that indeed. So in our organization, what we did, we began to apply need assessment visits on a regular basis to be able to see what people definitely needed. Something that was raised today at the level of communities. For example, some senior people with no relatives, people with disabilities were there, and we began to change the picture as providing our humanitarian assistance. Usually they would say about them, well, they have their pensions to draw, let their children assist them. well, even if those children had left Ukraine, they would say still these children are supposed to help their relatives and parents. So we included these people, the deserted citizens, if you like, as the ones that very much needed assistance, and donors understood, they supported us and accommodated our request, and they even went out within the framework of another project to see it with their own eyes, where we were going, who we were helping. And we were trying at that time to help people, the elderly, in an elderly home. And they began to target this particular group of people very systematically. So this is how internal coordination and empowerment can also come in handy. Another thing, for the sake of coordination, for efficient coordination, something else is important is changing modalities in coordination work. For the Women's Consortium, it was a shock to be included in providing humanitarian aid, a real shock indeed, because prior to that, this organization would just support women leadership, ensure gender equality, helping women in socio-economic reintegration and development. And a big chunk of their work was also targeting people, child protection. There was no humanitarian aid whatsoever. Therefore, to be expedient and to meet the needs and wants, everyone had to go through training. We would put on gloves, unload, upload different humanitarian cargoes that would come to us along different tracks. Then we would learn how to make procurements, how to plan, do reporting, etc. This is essential experience which donors, both we and you as donors, have to include and make part of your planning. Every time a project comes in and there is a team gathered, because in our team, for example, when I joined it, there were just 6 people working in the managerial office. But now for every project, which we have about a dozen, we have some 25, 26 employees working. So you can imagine what a substantial rise in terms of number we have received. Of course, there is tremendous turnover of staff. So these people have to be trained right from the beginning and all the way through, not like they just begin to do it officially and then some 3-4 months later they begin to teach you. Lots of blunders, mistakes have been committed, reporting is done incorrectly. You know, this is an additional trauma, emotionally and mentally. So training is a real big chunk in terms of improving coordination for providing humanitarian aid. Next, expansion of the circle of beneficiaries, something that we have also mentioned. This is extremely necessary in order to meet the needs within the society. Not only the IDPs have, have the right and are entitled to be supported, but due to the experience of the organization Right to Protection, I was able to say, come on, they're a hosting experience and the people living in them. So they included the people coming from these communities. We were able to see people going from one community to another community without any registration because they didn't enjoy the status of IDPs. These were not hosting communities, and people were migrating within 3 communities trying to find more comfort. So these are the people who also need help and protection. So they were included in the group of beneficiaries likewise. Next, we always ask about anything to do with additional circumstances. We account for age, not only middle-aged people, senior people, children people, single people, particularly, who are unfortunately left behind in terms of being provided any humanitarian aid, people of different age, gender. This was also a shocking discovery. We had to fill out huge papers with this data. We have Tatiana Druzenko with us, and she was in charge of the hotline, giving financial assistance, in charge of giving financial assistance. We were working really hard to make sure how to cover everyone record everyone, because these were the ones who would come for cash, mental relief, or whatever. So training, experience, sharing skills, knowledge, modalities. This is very much important and vital for coordination. Flexibility, resource base, resource pool. I think it's just as important and it needs to be added as part of recommendations. Now we are talking about humanitarian, mental, financial help, but we understand that we don't live by bread alone. We have to develop, mustn't leave this behind. In our organization, we began to see that we were turning into a humanitarian aid hub, procuring, distributing diapers, products, items, but we didn't see any development in that. So we had numerous conversations with donors, and we added developmental activities meant not only for our employees, but also for beneficiaries. And we would think, it's not the right time. Different meetings for women in cafes, for them to socialize, catch up on things, swap and share experiences, for them to see that they were not alone. There were similar women surrounding them with their children, etc. You know, this is something that I can share firsthand with you. For a lot of women, this was like an eye-opener, a new page in their lives, because they thought this was the end to their lives. They deserted their homes, and the only thing they were preoccupied with was finding money to provide for their kids. And suddenly we approached them and said, what are your talents? What are your kids' gifts? What hobbies do you have? What can you do to monetize that? And now we have a list of women interested and keen on such socioeconomic reintegration programs is more than 300 individuals. And we are preparing a training program for women in different regions. Yes, they lost their jobs, but what else do you have? I can do this, I can do that. So we are ready to render assistance to women, either to write their business plans, ideas, maybe then issue them with grants. And Deputy Minister, when he was talking to us today, was very important in terms of grant provision within the framework of a particular project. How to provide targeted monetary assistance, so that people get this money and don't have to pay 50% of that $100 cash that they get as assistance. So this is another important area for issues with coordination. That's all from me. We also have Tatiana Druzenko amongst us here today. She can also prompt and give you some more hints. Anastasia Saraja, who works with hubs. So should there be any questions or comments, you can also reach out to them. Thank you, Madam Larissa. Maybe at a later point, we will talk to them. So this is the project Women's Consortium in Ukraine. Let me sum up on what we have just heard and ask the following question. For my organization, I am the representative of Helping to Live, coordination to save rescue people. And we have been coordinating during this year within ourselves, parallelly, vertically with executive authorities, our partners, foreign, local ones. Coordination issues for our organization are none. We learned to coordinate ourselves, and we can teach others. I can see the main issue that we have been faced with during this military year, and something I have heard from you. It all boils down to a lack of transparency in terms of financial resources, drawing these financial resources. And in the first place, we are talking about foreign capabilities in terms of providing monetary assistance coming to us here. And if our session and community supports me, Now we would like to present the following idea. It's an initiative to establish an internet platform which would pursue in the first place as a goal adoption of possible requests from us, from humanitarian funds functioning here locally and nationally, which have been just established or perhaps have some substantial experience or any kind of experience in this area, who, with the help of one application, not more than 2 or 3 applications, depending on their area of occupation. So they would be able to access this platform, fill out this application form, and thus be able to communicate with this application with all organizations, international donors, NGOs, offices of the UN, in order to submit different requests like financial, humanitarian aid, educational services, professional, occupational assistance, whatever way that fits with your activities. I think this can greatly empower Ukraine and the whole situation that we have right now. Ukraine may become a pilot in this respect. And if this system gets to work and shows good outputs, maybe it will be possible to scale it up to other countries. And perhaps this idea should not decline anything. We say that this is an additional tool, that we don't have to shed anything. So this will enable you more and more greatly to communicate with donors, international organizations, without having to look for different sites, platforms, and facilities, trying to understand who, where they belong, how to fill out these application forms. Sometimes they may reply to these filled out documents some 3 months later, and they may say that the needs have already changed and you have to resubmit, and time is wasted. So in the future, you will be able to see the history of your communication, all of the aid that has been given to you. So you will be able also to track down your statistics, something that we have also mentioned. Organizations like the ones that work with people with disabilities, senior people, evacuees, etc. So the purpose of this platform would be to be transparent and open, ensure open access, and thus integrate the Ukrainian society with the international community on the basis of this platform. And I see multiple functions. One of them is, of course, financing, and another one is communication with the international community. If you're pro that, if you are ready to support this, I suggest that we include it in our draft statement. So yes or no? So let it be the proposition issued by the Ukrainian community to consider this and set up perhaps a working group, which within, let's say, 1 month will develop these set of principles, develop a draft version, and go to the level where all of this can be approved and financing can be allowed, and for us to do some piloting. So what do you have to say to that? Let's see who will be coordinating this issue in Ukraine, this topic in Ukraine. How important do you think it is? Is it needed, or do you think that we will continue learning by committing mistakes, discovering the bicycle, inventing the bicycle, discovering new agents and actors over and over again, once again being blind? Because this platform can immediately enable us to get general information and communicate between ourselves. It's one of the possible tools that can become a major one with time. Madam Alexandra, I would like to introduce Alexandra Makovska, who is a representative of Protection Cluster in Ukraine. So this proposal that I have just raised, issued by Ukrainian national and local funds to set up the platform that in the first place be able to ensure information sharing, also take care of information swap, training and gaining access to international aid providers locally. We don't want to decline cluster system. It's all functional and operational. It has to continue working and keep helping the work of funds and average citizens, etc. But we approach you to consider this possibility for the necessity to establish this perhaps bilingual platform, being Ukrainian and English one, and perhaps as a pilot to launch it here in Ukraine.
Спочатку
Hi, let me just first respond to what Maria said, and then I will share my own views on how to improve coordination. So what do we do, moderators? It's just well, if you can monitor what actually is happening, because if it's just airplanes in Belarusia, then we can continue, or do we go downstairs?
I think everyone knows there may be different creation
No,
of the threat, but we're going to take the most cautious approach. So what I would say is we're going to just take a pause right now and use the shelters. People can use them if they want. Feel free to continue the discussion if you want, but we should suspend for right now the conference, because there are some organizations that do have to take a different security position, and we want to just be the most cautious for them
Okay.
also.
Я сподіваюся, нам це тільки допоможе.
well, I hope this will, the small break will be a benefit.
Use the fire location stairs near the room number 20 on each floor. Then follow three shelter sites. Увага! Укриття оголошені на поверховому укриття знаходиться на другому поверсі нашого підземного парку. Щоб потрапити до укриття, необхідно спустити спочатку житлові двері на перший поверх. Використовуйте, будь ласка, евакуаційні сходинки з етапу на другому поверсі. На першому поверсі підійдете задрукованими вказівниками і далі підкажуть шлях до підземного укриття. The air raid warning has been set off. All clear. Please be very attentive, and in case of another air raid siren, it is recommended to go back to the shelter. Stay safe. Відбій повітряної тривоги. Просимо уважно слідкувати за ситуацією та у разі чергової повітряної тривоги повернутися до укриття. Бережіть себе.
Catherine, we're good. We're gonna start.
Чи спочатку Кетріна, потім я. Я кажу.
Okay. You guys can work it out. Not gonna have a Q&A, otherwise we skip. All right, let's reconvene. Let's reconvene.
Повертаємося, да, колеги? Не знаю, ось якийсь лежить, да? Все тоді.
Так, вітаємо. Ми продовжуємо.
Greetings. We continue. Alexandra Makovska is the next speaker. She presents protection cluster in Ukraine. We will ask her to comment on what she has already heard on the panel, coordination opportunities, what she has seen from her experience, how Ukrainian organizations are coordinated, what are the challenges, what are the prospects, what are your proposals or recommendations, and also I would like to ask to comment on the topic that we raised on the platform. We wanted to move into one document. Hello, and I represent the cluster of protection, the notorious or famous cluster. The competencies we work with is human rights, social protection, working with communities, and also protecting the rights of children, the GBV affected population, humanitarian demining. As for what we would recommend to improve in humanitarian coordination, we would recommend to ourselves as the responsible agents for this and all of our participants. Because we've assisted more than 140 organizations. Of them, 80 are national, more than 50 international NGOs, and the UN agencies actively engaged. So the first proposal to those international actors who work in Ukraine for some time or just are deploying their operation, you should remember that we're not coming to a clean slate. There are already a number of Ukrainian coordination platform helping Ukrainian civil society to coordinate their work. There's a coordination in the governmental agencies, the civil councils at the ministries, councils at the oblast and local administrations. After the start of large-scale warfare, we have a lot of oblasts created volunteer coordination centers. There's a big network of experts participating in policy making, and there are also national associations and communities such as people with disabilities represented by Larissa, also women's forums and women's organizations. What we orient the local coordinators in regions, other than the well-known architecture of humanitarian coordination that we know of, it's important to remember about other networks, other forums, and to orient ourselves what questions are discussed there, what organizations are participating in discussions within the cluster specific issues in order to help the participants to create new partnerships and not necessarily overburden the national organizations that had efforts before the war. We know that the effort of deinstitutionalization in terms of children and people with disabilities, etc. As for the recommendations for the national organizations, probably me as Ukrainian national who works in the cluster, I would first of all urge to ask to participate in humanitarian coordination on the oblast level, to be present. And don't be afraid of be vocal. Be vocal about your criticisms, your wishes as to how would you like the coordination to happen, what would you need? Maybe some international tools that are in very high priority, or they are too general, too superficial, not specific enough. So your voice has to be heard. And us as a coordinators, we would very much, it's very useful for us to hear your criticisms. We've heard a proposal to create an information platform that would be equally accessible and available to national organizations, those who grew out of the Grootstraat volunteer collectives that Maria represents, and would also be available to donor organizations. But we're not only talking about the information dissemination, we primarily talk about financial streams, their standardization. But using at least Ukrainian examples, yeah, we can hear that there is a request from national organizations to have information about the possible funding on a single resource, maybe in the same unified format. Maybe it's not the question we will be able to resolve at once, but conceptually, it is probably worth talking about what's the platform that this tool could be organized on, and using the opportunity of big donor organizations being present. Maybe it's worth listening to this plea and the request, and to make a step forward, the Ukrainian civil society, and build our own programs and make your priorities known and heard through the platforms used on the national level. And if we talk about coordination and avoidance of duplication of effort, it's important to have a flexible coordination. And as we see what's the objective for coordination, not everybody seems to be ready for their work to be coordinated. Sometimes it's important to be flexible and to be able to correct and adjust your plans in terms of coverage or in terms of working with our target groups, target population. Just like we've heard just now from Larissa, that despite regardless of all the guidelines in the ISC committee on inclusion of people with disabilities, we as a sector in Ukraine, we're too far away from even from international standards. That's why active communication with the National Association of People with Disabilities would have helped a lot of organizations who work here to come up with their programs and make these programs really inclusive. What else is worth adding? A lot of things have been said already. I think more active interaction with the national structures will allow to remove the obstacles that exist in the vocabulary and language. During the intercluster coordination meeting just last week, we've discussed how we could have improved localization and interaction with national partners, what is necessary, what are the indicators that we could implement for international structures, what clearer definition and engagement of national organizations. Of course, that is important to do. We're currently finalizing this work. But primarily what we need is changing our philosophy and challenging our approaches. We've talked a lot about the training of national organizations nowadays. At the same time, capacity building is also a very necessary tool for international organizations who start their work in Ukraine, how Ukrainian social protection works, what are the national systems for monitoring of human rights violations, the national preventive mechanisms at the Ombudsman office, that there are whole networks of organizations that specialize in children's right protection. As Darina, she represents one of those organizations. There's also network organizations working with affected population affected by human trafficking. Either organizations entering Ukraine would not start with something that worked for them in Syria or Afghanistan, but starting from what is working in Ukraine. Because over the last 30 years, we have cooperated and developing the system of civil society in Ukraine, and many donors have invested in different platforms for coordination. Which of them could we use? Which of them could we adapt to the current reality and current challenges, etc.? And we've just had a person from Ministry of Social Policy presenting different digital tools. What else I would like to add in this context? All the international structures have certain managerial structures, either for data collection or for data processing. They already have platforms that can be used for people to reach for help. If Ukrainian organizations continue to raise the question of quality of these platforms, then maybe the conclusion is that in Ukraine, this sector has probably developed a bit better than elsewhere, and we could make one step forward and see what are the platforms and solutions designed in Ukraine. What are the expectations of Ukrainian society, those platforms that they can use to request help? But that needs a certain flexibility within our organizations. On the previous session, we had Marco from Coordination Office also talked about co-leadership in the cluster by the national organizations. What I can tell you is that Protection Cluster will have the such co-leadership from the human rights organization Pravo na Zahist, and the coordinator just started working this week. Tatiana Lazan is her name. We expect this to significantly improve the work of the cluster, in particular cooperating with national partners. But alongside with that, of course, we need resources for that. And the first idea to engage the national co-coordinator back in June, right until the donors have allocated the resources so that the person could start working and be 100% committed to the task. How much time has passed? Well, a bit above 6 months. So,
Дякуємо за ваші відповіді, дякуємо за
Thank you for your replies. Thank you for supporting our initiative. Now it's Catherine Green to speak. She's a representative of World Vision International Humanitarian Organization. This is an international charity fund, one of the largest organizations to provide humanitarian aid in the world. I know that you have been working since 1950, right? So you have a substantial deal of experience. I would like to hear from you some recommendations, your vision and your part as an international organization representative, the topic of coordination with national local funds. Is this direct cooperation feasible, or do you require any affiliations, representative offices here? So what's your vision?
Let me take that off so I don't hear my accent back in my ear. I guess I would first say that while World Vision has been operating since 1950. We have only been operating here in Ukraine since last year. So, you know, I feel wildly unqualified to sit up here and talk about coordination in Ukraine. So I feel, you know, thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you for sharing all of your comments so openly. A couple of things. So I heard in the last session, and maybe Marco, you should have been up here for the coordination session, but I heard you talking about, you know, no one here has bad intentions, and I think that's absolutely the case. That, you know, everyone is here because they really believe in the topic, and you mentioned that you know, no one has bad intentions, but there are systems in place. But those systems are made by people, you know, in rooms like this. Sitting around making decisions. Systems are not, you know, handed down, you know, from above. And I think if we look at the cluster system, the first time I ever worked on a humanitarian response in 2005, the cluster system as we know it now was just being introduced. So, you know, and that came from the, you know, transformational agenda, recommendations about how to improve coordination in humanitarian responses. So we know that there is change possible. It can be slow, but, you know, this is a system that has changed before, and it could change again if there is the political will. And that's not to say someone else has to have that political will to do it. That is on all of us as leaders in whatever capacity we are here in. It's on me, it's on Marco, it's on all of us to change the system, because the system is made by people. I guess I would also reflect some of the points made by other people up here that, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about how to engage local partners into the formal humanitarian architecture. And, you know, certainly there is a case to be made, as Sasha was saying, about promoting the value of coordination. Certainly we don't want to just be coordinating for the sake of coordinating. For me, coordination is only valuable if it is improving humanitarian aid effectiveness, reducing duplication, you know, coordinating access and efficient use of funding. So if people aren't seeing the value in coordination, then for sure they are not going to be part of those mechanisms. But I also think that we probably need to think less about how do we encourage local NGOs to coordinate in the formal humanitarian architecture, and ask ourselves as INGOs and other humanitarian organizations, how do we engage with some of the existing coordination mechanisms that already exist, like the Ukraine Women's Network, the Coalition for People with Disabilities. You know, these, like you say, we're not starting from zero. So that is on us, that's on me as the response director for Ukraine, to be looking at the context that I'm working in, and not just saying, here is our international humanitarian coordination mechanism, please participate in it. You know, it's a two-way street for coordination, and you know, and it really is about a behavior and an attitude change, I think. You know, I think it's also things like this forum itself is one of the coordination mechanisms that I think that we can look to, and that is valuable to, you know, to influence the decisions that we make as organizations. As I've been sitting here, I'm texting some of the recommendations to my head office, you know, saying, what are we doing about this? We're a $3 billion organization. Oh, which one?
Які?
So, you know, it also, everyone here who represents an international NGO should be advocating within their own bureaucracy for change. And that's not easy. I definitely, you know, have many headaches with my own organizational bureaucracy, but that doesn't mean that you don't advocate for change in the sphere of influence where you can, to say, this is what we're hearing from the local community where we're working, and so change needs to be made. So it's forums like this, it's engaging with your organizations, it's the civil councils that are already set up by the Cabinet of Ministries. There's also the NGO forum, the NGO Humanitarian Forum, which, you know, I would really encourage local organizations to be part of so that we can look at collective actions and advocacy. You know, and this is and taking note of the recommendations. I think, you know, this you know, a timeline for increasing Ukrainian involvement and leadership. Okay, I'm going to make sure I go back to my office and actually do something about it, not just say I went to a conference and they had nice tea and biscuits. Like taking the recommendations from things like this and putting them into action. I also think there's something to be said about coordination with government. You know, we cannot, as individual organisations, be coordinating with government at a local level because they are wildly overburdened. So we need to be working, you know, in a coordinated effort to, you know, to actually engage with government. And I'm, you know, not sure how we do that effectively, but that's something that I think about a lot as well. I really like what you said about capacity building needs to be a two-way street. And I also think that accountability needs to be a two-way street. So there is a lot of focus on assessing local NGOs and have they done this, have they done that? I would love to see the tables turned, and I would love to see our local implementing partners holding us accountable. You know, I know that this happens in other contexts, like in Somalia, where collectively the NGOs assess the INGO partners that they've worked with in the year. They rate them, they rank them, and you can see, okay, well, World Vision was not a great partner. They, you know, didn't do X, Y, and Z this year. And so then other organizations can say, we don't want to partner with you because we know that last year you did X, Y, and Z, or you weren't transparent, or you didn't provide overhead funding. I spoke to Julia today from NGO Girls, and I think we'll have that context here in Ukraine because there is so much humanitarian aid coming into the country, and local NGOs are going to have the power to say, we don't want to work with you. She gave me feedback about the process that her organization went through working with World Vision on an ECHO proposal. And she said, you know what, that wasn't great. I don't know if we want to partner with you on another proposal. And, you know, it will really become this situation where as the client, they will choose who they work with. And if we are not performing well as INGOs, then we will not be able to fulfill our mandate to serve the most vulnerable people. So, you know, I think for me, this is yet another kick in the bottom to, you know, really take this seriously, make the change that I can within my sphere of influence as the response director of Ukraine. I can't make changes to the entire organization, although I wish I could. I can't make changes to the entire humanitarian architecture, although I wish I could, but Marco, let me know if I can. But, you know, for me, I will be taking, you know, everything I've heard today. I'll be reaching out to people. I'll be trying to take on board those recommendations and take it seriously.
Дякую, пані Катерина, за
Thank you, Madam Catherine, for your constructive speech, for your proposals, for your attempt to give leadership role to Ukrainian local national organizations. We will definitely assume it. We will carry it off to the best of our ability because that's something that we are striving to do. I would like to extend my gratitude to all of our panelists for your speeches. You are all up to wonderful things, and I appeal with you to carry on doing the same. Press on. And I wish you to have a lot of resilience to go on and on, of course, until we reach better times. So now we are opening a Q&A session, should you have any. If there are no questions, so let's take it to the next panel. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. It's way too intense. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being able to stay here till the end and at least to talk about the next topic, localizing humanitarian funding and improving partnerships. I'm very happy to welcome all of our panelists because without funding, no project will be implemented. This goes without saying, and the lion's share of implementation always lies in the fact which particular organizations will unlock funding, where this funding will go to, and how purposeful will be the usage of this funding. And in the context of this, I would like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and perhaps immediately to give an answer to a very brief question, which is, what is your ideal international partner? What does your ideal international partner look like? Because we always appeal to equal partnerships, but not to equal partnerships. So what do you see the organization that would best meet with the requirements of this role? So I immediately hand over the microphone.
Oh, right. Turn this off. So my name is David. I'm with the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund. I also feel slightly unqualified to work here because I've only been, or to be here today because I've only been in country a month. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about pool funds globally and kind of the lessons that OCHA has learned around localization and funding globally. And then we also have Madoka in the room, who has been working on the fund for longer than I have and has been specifically working on the localization strategy and the funding that's going to the national NGOs and the local civil society actors. I guess from a global perspective, and I've worked on a number of funds, with the pool funds, it's clear that there is no one size fits all approach for localization. Sorry, there's no one size fits all for localization, and there's no one size fits all for providing funding to national NGOs and CSOs and volunteer groups. Funds, the pool funds themselves try as much as possible to be contextually relevant. And each context is very different. I've noticed today in the recommendations, today there was a recommendation around looking at some of the examples, for example, in Afghanistan of how pool funds work there, and we welcome that. And of course, we will do that. But the context is very different in Afghanistan, and you can't take a cookie cutter approach and just say, okay, well, that worked in Afghanistan, it might work here, or that worked in the Turkey Fund, that might work here. I think it also goes without saying that this should be locally driven. The pool funds are, as much as possible, and localization itself, the agenda, should be locally driven. Where we've seen successful pool funds is where there's been strong civil society actors coming together and holding the international community to account. So there's been a lot of talk about accountability earlier on, and just now colleagues were talking about how the international community, it's made lots of commitments. We've all made lots of commitments, but very sadly, I think we haven't actually reached those. So we need strong national NGO bodies and forums to hold the international community to account to the commitments it made. And it's not just around financing and financing targets. There's much more to localization than just providing X% of funding to national NGOs. There needs to be empowered leadership. There needs to be capacity building. There's a whole range of issues that should be part of a localization strategy. And we collectively, not just the pool funds, but collectively as a system, needs to engage in that. But it has to be locally driven. I can think of one example for pool funds in Turkey, which managed funding for the Syria cross-border, and the national NGOs there didn't sit back and wait for localization to happen. They weren't waiting for international actors to meet their commitments, to meet their targets, to ensure that there were national actors on the various forums, on the HCT, in the cluster system, etc. They were strong and they were vocal and they made it happen. They pushed for this. One of the reasons now that we have many more local actors on the advisory board, for example, for pool funds, is because this push was driven by the national NGOs there. The national NGOs also ensured that they were driving decisions at a cluster level, at an HCT level. Like it or not, there is a system in place, and it could be a lot better. But these are where the decisions are made, and this is where local actors need to be in decision-making parts of that system.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, let's pass. If it's okay, just I would really like to focus your attention for a short answer to the question: what is the perfect international partner for you? If you
perfect
international partner,
national,
yeah,
or international.
International, national. I mean, if we are talking about localizing here in Ukraine, maybe what is the perfect Ukrainian organization can receive funding? Yeah, what should be this organization like? Yeah,
my name is Roberto Vila. I'm the country director of the Norwegian Refugee Council in Ukraine. It's a tough question. It's a tough question for an organization like NRC that doesn't have the best track record when it comes to working with partners. NRC has been a direct implementer in nature for decades, and I mean we are on a very steep learning curve when it comes to partnerships. But I mean, here we're learning a lot, and we're learning fast because there is no choice but to learn fast, because it's as it's been mentioned before, there is a very strong civil society, a very strong non-governmental organizations in the country. So they've raised their voice. Is actually, I mean, localization. I hadn't heard so much about localizations since I arrived here in Ukraine. I'm not sure if even the word localization is the best word to describe this. I know that there are national NGOs that don't necessarily like it, but because it feels that is a localization agenda, not necessarily also think that most national NGOs like it, because it feels that it's something devised by international agencies. So to me, I mean, what's my idea of the perfect national partner? I mean, I think is to echo some of what has been mentioned before. Is a partner that we can relate to, that we can cooperate with on equal terms, and for that obviously we need. And I remember that the answer had to be short, so I'd be short. but so that and not necessarily that aligns with the sectors we work in, but that complements, or that we can complement as NRC the work that national organization is already doing in Ukraine with the sectors of our expertise. But I think, yeah, I mean, the main question here is maybe comes later. Yeah, we'll leave it. I think there is a great number of national NGOs in Ukraine that have been delivering frontline since the escalation of the war. There is a lot to learn from them. For organizations like NRC, I would tell national NGOs just to be a bit patient with us while we learn. Thank you.
Fred from
Yeah, Fred is NGRC. Ми кажемо, що ідеальний партнер, якщо подивитись на міжнародні неурядові організації, які з нами співпрацюють, то я б сказав, що це
was we would look for a long-term engagement. We would look for the other partner to accept our strengths and weaknesses in this partnership. And that would be involve an exchange of views or transfer of knowledge in both directions. And as all marriages or as all relationship, there must be a level of trust. And when we look at an international NGO and determine if we want to have a partnership, then we would say that, tell them that we will look and we believe that humanitarian action should be as local as possible, as international as necessary. And the role of international organizations should be to fill gaps, to transfer knowledge, and to have a complementary approach. A positive role and a partnership that has a positive role to not replace current structures, organizations, or staff, but use existing local capacity to the greatest extent possible. And through such a partnership or marriage, I believe that the humanitarian action would be more effective and efficient.
Thanks, Fred. I have to confess to being also called Fred. It's unusual to have two Freds on the same panel. I'm from FCDO, which is the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, which is also known as UK Aid. So we are a humanitarian donor, amongst other things. I want to answer your question. And if we have time, I can also say a little bit about how else we're responding to the agenda of the day. But in terms of perfect partners, I first of all think we shouldn't have too many preconceived ideas. But we're looking for organizations that are demonstrably responsive to needs, finding practical solutions, looking after the welfare and safety of their own staff and the volunteers where applicable, actively inclusive of the most vulnerable, meaning also ensuring that that potentially marginalized people are not missing out from what they're doing. Ready to share their experiences and priorities, whether that's through reporting or through dialogue, as has been emphasized today a lot. And ideally aware of or having an understanding of the humanitarian principles and the relevant guidelines, which is, the guidelines is asking a lot because, as was mentioned earlier today, they can be very lengthy and detailed, but I think it depends on the nature of the work. But also ready to discuss sticking points and challenges in an open way. So those would be some of the qualities we'd look for, but I think it was interesting to hear in the last panel, the point about, you know, hearing what they might be looking for from the perfect donor. So that might be another sort of part of the question for another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Дякую, Фред. Мене звуть Анатолій Бойко.
Thank you, Fred. My name is Anatoly Boyko. I represent Odessa Regional Organization of the Ukrainian Electoral Committee. It's a strange question and very philosophical, like a question, what is love? Yeah, it would seem like everybody understands what it is, but still we could discuss for a lot of hours. You know, there were these chewing gum or candy where the inserts have a small comic strip, love is. If I would think what an ideal partner or ideal donor is for me, that the first emotional thing I would say is the donor, where a letter comes from the donor, you are not grabbing your heart like, oh God, again, but you're most of the time happy that there's some good news, that we can talk about something valuable. I understand we might come from different background, different experience, different needs, but for me, it would be important that the international partner or donor is not toxic. Remember, you talked about traumatic experience. Unfortunately, over the recent years in big projects, there is some part of that. And I'm not only talking about procedures. I've worked with dozens of different donors who work with American taxpayer money. And if with some big projects, it was wonderful. With others, it was cardiac arrest and burnout and everything. Although there was the same source of the same money. But somehow in the process, it happened differently. So to be more on the topic, for me, it's important that the donor would be genuine in willing to change something for better. Something else other than indicators is important for them. I understand that that's the way the system is designed and it's very important. But if the whole calculation boils down to, you know, you should deliver that many numbers in that table, and in the long run, they don't care what happens to this area as soon as the money runs out. That is far from inspiring, I would say. And, you know, as colleagues said, it should be co-creativity, starting from planning, implementation, and down into the deliverables. Because from time to time, you know, it's like we were doing it together, but suddenly you are nobody, and the laurels and recognition is received by the donors only. So we've done that together. You're great guys. You've delivered your mission. They say, yeah, we delivered on our mission, but you know, a little bit of appreciation would not harm. So there are donors. There are great donors. There are great partners. And I wish you all find your own ideal partner. Thank you. Thank you for those responses. Yeah, this question would have seemed irrelevant for the discussion, but on one hand, it's about how do we want to see those organizations. They should be professional. They should be transparent. They should be organizations who are well aware of the local problems. But on the other hand, where with such organizations, and I work in a charity organization, a Ukrainian charity organization, and I represent this organization. So And we often face the question, where could we take money to develop, to have our capacity building? And oftentimes you see where donor organizations are not ready to allocate money for development, capacity development, administrative overhead. The organization would design things that are not priority for the donor, but the priority for the organization, like advocacy or other things. So maybe that's a question to my Ukrainian colleague. How do you deal with that? Where do you find resources for that? If you're convenient answering. Just like all of us, wherever we can. And it's a huge challenge, really. And again, the recent years, when I'm talking about big projects, over $100,000. I understand you have your own scale, what the bigs. For some, it's some peanuts, So we work with projects $150,000. So it would seem like there's no problem in allocation, but sometimes we even face problems where we want to have an establishing meeting together with strategic planning. Well, people will still get together, but they told us how. It's not possible. It's not relevant to the topic of your project. You can't spend money on this. But my point is that such big projects require big workload, a big focus. But then they also need growth. How should an organization that earlier organized project of worth $50,000 would suddenly jump to $500,000 without capacity building? So we don't have a template. We mix and match, we diversify sources, we try and take a bit here, a bit there. There are donors who are more agreeable to this mix and match. And it's thanks to them, primarily, we successfully do capacity building. But that's an anomaly. And I'm deeply confident that if we, as Ukrainian organizations, had the opportunity, at least 5% to spend on organizational development and growth, then the efficacy of delivering of the rest of the 95% of our funding and implementation would have been much better, much bigger. So I see two problems with capacity building: lack of resources and lack of complex, ready program. Like if you come today and find an expert in Ukraine, or at least an algorithm, like what do you have to do, steps 1, 2, 3 to 5 for your organization to flourish? Nobody will tell you like a recipe. Some will say, well, communication, you should do that. Another, you should do this and that. And in different areas, different industries, they can tell you different things. And I can compare. Our organization deals with a wide range of activity. We have the directly NGO-related activity, and we have media-related activity. So from last year, donors started finally allocating money for institutional growth of the media-related work. And I haven't seen such experts in organizational development as in media community. They come to you, 1, 2, 3, and they deliver. Not like in the humanitarian sector, or maybe this, maybe that, and nobody knows how. Thank you for the answer. And I'd like to address the question to representatives of donor organizations. Fred, maybe you. So are they ready? Are the donor organizations feel this necessity to invest money for organizational capacity of Ukrainian organizations? Because we are talking in Ukraine today about Ukrainian NGOs.
Yes, we feel this necessity. We recognize that it is only fair, but also beyond that, it's not a point of principle. It's a point, as just explained, it's about how organizations can function and grow, and to just we make a distinction between project costs and non-project costs, or sometimes called indirect costs. I can give a couple of examples, but the most prominent one, well, I can give two examples if that's okay. So we have, as well as some support to the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund, which we have someone here to describe. We have a flexible grant mechanism which is supposed to help Ukrainian and Polish humanitarian responders access our funding more directly and with more technical support than we ourselves can provide. It is administered through one partner, Mercy Corps, but they work closely with their partners to set the direction of the fund and to pass on these non-project attributable costs or indirect costs. So that's a tangible example of something that we're doing. That our colleagues in the British Embassy also have a fund which is called the Civil Society Fund, or that's how it's known. It's £10 million worth, and it seeks to support Ukrainian citizens and civil society exercising voice and more involvement in decision-making, as well as contributing to crisis recovery, even in a transparent way, of course. This fund just today launched a new window, as it's known, on resilience and sustainability, and that's grants of up to £100,000 for between 3 to 12 year period. So it is long term, as was requested earlier today in scope, and that I can give more details, but I think we're short of time.
Thank you.
I think when we look at capacity building, this is something we do on a daily basis, especially for national NGOs. I think we need to, as the same with partnerships, we need to look at trust, and we need to look at long-term engagement. We need to look more at mentorship structures. What does not work, this we know. That is to adopt models from South Sudan or Yemen, or take them from Pakistan and have a standard program. And then for the donor or for the international NGO to tick it off. Yes, we provided capacity building, and now we have done localization. That is not how it should work. But you should also be open when you provide capacity building. You need to have feedback mechanisms, and you need to be able to have indicators of on your trainings to make sure that they actually work. And we can do thousands of training. If I get the grant for Fred, please do 100 trainings, and I just report on the output to FCDO, for example, or to USAID. Yes, we did 100 trainings. That is not relevant at all. If those trainings were absolutely useless and nobody learned anything and they were boring and there were no communication, I have not had any effect at all on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. Then it's better to do 20 trainings and to be able to say, yeah, the knowledge of each single individual increased with an average of 20%. This is what we should look at. We need to monitor our trainings as well. It's not just to do fabricated trainings, which has been used in all kinds of humanitarian responses. And when it does not work, because that happens, when it does not work, be it on accounting or being on product management or being on prevention of sexual exploitation of children, then we need to adjust, and we need to be honest with ourselves, and we need to be able to take the input from the participants and ask them, so how do we be better next time? This, I think, is very important.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's quite telling that us, and now I'm speaking as Norwegian Refugee Council, but maybe some other international NGOs, we're referred to as donors. We're not referred to as our international partner. So we'll call donors and it's quite telling because most of the time we don't, I mean, we pretty much do what our colleague Anatoly was describing, and because it's all about procedure and it's about compliance, which is important, obviously, and cannot be left aside. But on the issue of overheads, I mean, and administrative costs for national organizations, I think is. I mean, the Grand Bargain, it provides a framework, right, on what kind of or guidance on what would be fair for a fair split between national and international NGOs, and some donors allow that. Some donors allow to allocate overheads directly to national NGOs. Other they don't, and for that, at least in our case, NRC is working on a what is called, and probably it's been discussed here over the last few days, but what is called a cascading overhead. So it's and then developing our own internal financial tools so we can facilitate that and share part of our the overheads that we get from the donors. Then how, I mean, going to how to localize humanitarian funding in Ukraine. I think OCHA's UHF pool funding is I mean, a very good example. Is longer term. I mean, it's a year and a half. FCDO as well with Mercy Corps. I mean, it's quite flexible, but there shouldn't be the only options available in the country. I think that there are ideas out there, like for instance, the START network that works really well in other countries to allocate emergency response funding that could be replicated in Ukraine with the participation of both national and international organizations in the decision-making process of where the funding goes to, the same way as we make decisions on pool funding granted to us by international donors that are more flexible that way. But yeah, I think it's an important, is a crucial, a vital question to answer by donors, and I'm talking about donors as donor countries, not as international NGOs donors as donors, but and then multi-year, as Fred was saying. It facilitates quite a lot the task, not just for national NGOs, for international NGOs as well, especially in crisis like this one that with so many different dimensions.
Тут стільки усіляких вимірів.
And recovery in the coming months.
Да, дякую дуже за відповіді. Да, вони дуже цінні і.
Thank you very much for these answers. They're so valuable because we can hear the unanimous position concerning the necessity to develop capacities for Ukrainian organizations. I also have several specific questions to pose to you. And I'm sure that all of the representatives of Ukrainian NGOs will perhaps resonate with my pain and support me in my questioning you. This question will relate to the process of cooperation and financing projects that we receive as Ukrainian organizations from our international partners. More often than not, especially if it talks about involving financing or funding from the UN, there are special schemes of work whereby at the beginning of the project, they allocate 30% of the overall value of the project to start implementation. And then as we report, other tranches, other disbursements may come, but about 30, 40 less percent will only be allocated to the organization after final reporting has been submitted. And if there are no objections as to the narratives or the reporting, whatever. So the question is, how can Ukrainian organizations with this scheme, under the scheme, implement their projects? Because for the most time, they don't have their own funding. And they can do something and carry on doing something if they have exceptionally have donorship support. So is there an answer to such a question based on the experience of the UN? Is there a global understanding concerning how hard it is for the Ukrainian organizations at this point in particular when they have to find some funding for the implementation, which eventually will get back to them if the implementation is carried out successfully? So how shall we be in this situation?
So, I mean, I think it's linked to the certainly in terms of pool funds, it's linked to the last question. So around the capacity building, and as pool funds, we have provided, we do provide for directly funding national partners, then they are entitled to overheads. And then when we provide funding through either a consortium approach or through international NGOs to national NGOs, then there is provision in the pool fund for those international NGOs to provide shared costs that go into that. We also have a system whereby partners are assessed prior to receiving funding. And so this issue that you're talking about, where partners only receive a certain amount of funding, that depends on how they do through the assessment. So we have three assessment categories, and it's kind of low, medium, and high. So where partners are actually assessed as low, then they actually can receive more than the 30%. In fact, I believe it's 70 to 100% of the project up front, depending on the size of the funding. So, but this is, it's linked to the capacity assessment. But the capacity assessment isn't a one-off system that happens just at the beginning. Partners are continuously assessed through various processes. And so this grading, as partners progress, this grading can change. And so then the modalities by which we give money and the reporting requirements, etc., they all change as they go through this process.
One of the things that is constantly we've been told, I mean, that our processes are too heavy. That is, we're at times stricter than our national partners, strictest donors. One of the issues that have been raised about the pool fund, or that we've heard, is that is complex to access. I mean, that it could be lightened. I mean, the same way that our internal procedures at NRC require and are undergoing a total overhaul to make sure that we are not that strict partner and that we can address and the capacity of our different national partners. And so, but anyway, the other thing that we're trying to do to learn as fast as we can is to incorporate our national partners in the discussion of our country strategy, which is being built as we speak for the next 3 years, and we would like to incorporate that to the core of our strategy, to be able to become a better international partner for them.
No, not at all. Now I'm a member of the advisory board, and I will be. Yeah, so we will be in the next meeting. And on the next meeting, I think this is an issue we will take up, because it's not the low risk partners that doesn't have the 10%. It's not the medium risk partners. It's the high risk partners for whom this is a problem. And that is one of the issues I think we should discuss. I have a whole list of issues. And it would be really, really unfair of me right now to put you on the spot of this. But I mean, we also, to change how donors or how the UHF works, we need to take the opportunity to provide input from the field, to provide a reality of the context where we work. We do not need to, or at least Ukrainian NGOs do not need to wait for Geneva or New York to take a decision. We have a responsibility to provide them with the relevant input and say, this is not good enough. And then somebody else can take the decision and they can say, no, we will not change it. But that would not be so fruitful, I think, to have a good cooperation with national NGOs going forward.
You want from everyone? Yeah. Okay, we go. Yeah, sure. Obviously, I would just say that we this business of paying in tranches, as we would call it, is part of the approach to risk management. And I agree with the points made earlier that should be proportionate. That is more or less our policy, to be as proportionate as we can. And we would encourage and are encouraging UHF to take a similar approach. I mean, we can't ask the same complex questions of everyone. We need to be asking the relevant questions for what risks are most pertinent for what they're doing, where they are. But I repeat, we want to support organizations, local organizations, as directly as possible. But a little like USAID was saying, we must be honest about the constraints we face, about the number of partnerships we can responsibly take on in an accountable way, as has been described earlier. There are also legal definitions of what we can count as official development assistance, what we have to account to our parliament, to our public back home who pay their tax. And part of that expectation is that we manage the risk, but it is also up to us to ask those questions about where it's really not working for our partners or our would-be partners, and to feed that back. And I'd just take the opportunity to say how, whilst grateful for this opportunity to be on the panel, my colleague Becca at the back there, who's waving, and I, we're emphasizing to anyone we meet today, we're here in listening mode. We're here to take notes, to learn, hear the recommendations, to communicate, as Diana was saying earlier and others have said, to our colleagues, and it's really timely for us. We are genuinely engaged in this conversation, trying to understand. Localization does mean, as has been said earlier, different things to different people. There was a meeting in Brussels the other day with senior officials, and our person who went also had the same observation. So it's really important that we move now to measurable progress. And I think the baseline study we may come on to may have opportunity to talk about how we measure progress. We are active among the group of donors or groups of donors here. We're very willing, the conversation has started, but we're willing to see what other joint actions we can agree on collectively, as well as what we can manage individually. And maybe the baseline study will be part of that, as well as the more regular dialogue with local actors, as has been recommended today.
Дякую. Знаєте, мені прийшло.
Thank you. You know, I've just got myself thinking, it's just like providing weapons to the armed forces of Ukraine. We have Scandinavian, German, American, Italian, French, howitzers, and I'm sorry if I have omitted someone. We are endlessly, boundlessly grateful to you, but sorry to say they're all very diverse and they require diverse provision as well as supplies. And this requires a great many efforts to be able to get around all of these things. And I totally agree with Fred. There should be proportionality adhered to, and there should be this also point of control ensured, but proportionality attributed to these points of control, because as you said, some donors don't have 30% at the final stage. Others don't have 10% at the final stage. Others are not even required any reporting from. It's like a practice within USAID projects that at the beginning of your project, you provide confirmation for the different outlay at the beginning. It's okay. And then there's no reporting. As it happens, it's possible. The program manager just controls the completion of milestones. Once you have done the work, you get the disbursements, the tranches, but there are no financial reports to submit on a regular basis. However, the final tranche will be paid to you after the achievement of the final milestone. But once again, there are some that will not provide you with the final payment based on rigorous requirements. So there are a variety of different approaches. It's possible. So I would appeal with all of us to go and strive for the sensible balance between rigorous control and this making sure that there is sufficiency to ensure this control. When people say we cannot change it because it cannot happen another way, no, it can. I am for dialogue and for striking this reasonable, prudent balance, because mistrust is always a lack. Each time we implement a new procedure and there is mistrust or distrust, again, this costs us money and time. Therefore, every procedure must make sense. And this is, by the way, to do with also your image of the ideal partner. Yes, thank you very much for your inputs, for your contributions. Perhaps the last remark for me, but not as a moderator, however, as a representative of a nationwide Ukrainian organization. Each time we have to report additionally about some with additional complications involved. So payments may be put on stall, the implementation of the project may be delayed, and everything is also understandably suffers. Especially in the case if the organization is sustainable, transparent, if right from the start it can be checked and verified, this can once again contribute to the credibility, which eventually will simplify and streamline the work and will guarantee that the project will be implemented by its deadline within the determined goals and successfully. And I would like to turn the mic to the audience, because I'm sure you do have some questions. For my part, I would like to thank all of our panelists, because I have to excuse myself. I need to dash. So thank you very much for your answers and for your readiness to engage in a conversation with Ukrainian organizations and for the support that you are ready to give us. Оксана, величезне вам спасибі. У нас лишилося лише 5 хвилин, але все ж таки ми можемо заслухати декілька запитань.
Just one for David. The Ukraine Humanitarian Fund went from, I think, around $12 million in 2021 to $340 million. The largest pool fund, we can parse it, but in the world. Does the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund with Fred and Oksana coming with their list of demands to do more, faster, better, more local, do you have the capacity this year to do more, to go faster? Could you take on more funds as well if donors say, we want to expand your operations and your grants to CSOs? Where is the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund this year? Who has questions also? I know Sasha does. Yes, okay.
So to answer your question around the last one first, around do we have more capacity to take on more funds? We are building that capacity. If you were going to give me more funds tomorrow, we have, it depends on how much more that we receive. We're slowly building more capacity. What we're also doing is putting pool fund offices in the regions. Right now, we've been a very centralized system. So we're now putting pool fund offices matching with the coordination and OCHA's coordination structure. So we're going to have a big hub in Dnipro with about 6 staff there. We're going to have hubs in Kyiv, Odessa, Lviv. So that is increasing, not only increasing our capacity, but ensuring that we have people that can work with national partners close to the field on the ground. It has been a slow process because it was overnight. Literally, as you say, we scaled up, and there is, if we're going to be realistic, there is still more work to do in increasing that capacity. But yes, equally as the scale of the fund has grown, the amount of funding to national NGOs has grown as well. And so today it was mentioned, I think 23%, that's direct funding, but overall it's 33% of our funds, direct and indirect, that goes to national NGOs.
Check.
Thank you so much. I have a few words about trainings, as this question already was open. So I need to say that training, it's good, really good work, like tool for capacity building. I have experience in this as I was worked in Norwegian Refugee Council, like community engagement officer. And in time of quality training, you always have new vision of people who work with you and who actually in this training, and always have fresh view on the situation in this area and in this community group. So we always can use this tool and in any moment, like building strong local organization. And besides, as we know, people already ask about this. So how I understand it's interesting and it can be good for us. Thank you.
Maybe we'll just take one other question with this. Okay, so I guess this will be the closing remarks. Also, Tatiana from Caritas was supposed to be on this panel as well, but it was quite sick and was not able to come from Lviv and regrets this. She just wanted to say. So was there any kind of last comment around this question? Please, Fred, or both Freds. You can speak at the same time. First. Can you cooperate between Freds?
So should Fred 1 start first, maybe?
Your Fred 1.
Capacity is really important. And I think you touched upon some very important things. And which relates also to the due diligence processes. And that is that capacity is often defined by the perception of our own strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, when we go through the UHF due diligence process, and when they assess our capacity, or the UK assess our capacity, they look at that from their own lens to a certain extent. So, for example, shouldn't local knowledge be assessed and valued as much as if we have an authorization matrix in our organization? Shouldn't how much we engage with the national NGOs, how much we know about the national NGOs in Kramatorsk or in Ternopil be valued as much as we have experience from international pool funds before? So we need to look at how we have established what is capacity, because we have strengths and weaknesses as international and national organizations, and that should be reflected within the due diligence processes as well. And I think that's a very, very important thing. Now, capacity assessments of organizations wanting funding, due diligence processes of organizations wanting funding from Ukraine is all processed through a very, very narrow lens, which has been established somewhere far, far away. But as they say in Star Wars, yeah, we will try to combat that as well.
I think we're probably at closing remarks time. I'll be very brief. You've been very committed to this issue, to be here in number at this time of day. Thank you. I think Anatoly, it's Anatoly, right? Anatoly set us a low baseline in challenging us to not be toxic. I think we should be able to commit to that. And recognizing the point that trust is precious that's been made, but also understanding of context is equally to be valued and is more than essential. I think that's a sort of it seems obvious, but it's worth reiterating. I would close by saying we do recognize there is a lot more we can do on this as an individual donor working collectively, etc. We're here to be part of the conversation. We take away the 14 recommendations that we started the day with, but also we've been taking notes through the day. And thanks again, Dякую.
Yeah, Anatoly, please, we'll have the last word.
Я перепрошую.
I beg your pardon. You know, there is a very fine Ukrainian proverb. Those who want to do something, they look for opportunities, but those who want to shirk responsibility, they always look for excuses. And I think it runs like a red line. It transverses our discussion end to end. So I want us to seek opportunities rather than excuses. Talking about specific recommendations, back when Nicholas in Odessa was presenting the results of his research, which I totally support, because the outputs of this research fully coincide with our research, because last year, we had a poll for 20 humanitarian centers in Odessa with reference to small and big challenges that they are confronted with. And when Nicholas presented the results of his study, I was just vastly impressed about how much this all overlapped and coincided. This is one thing. And on the other hand, I very well understand, just as it was nicely said today, there is an architecture of providing humanitarian aid, which was established back in the days of the Egyptian pyramids, maybe even earlier than that. And it may not be so easy on the one hand. On the other hand, there is our Ukrainian reality. So we have to talk about that. We need to move towards each other. We need to try to accommodate each other. We mustn't pull the tug of war. We need to have these platforms and facilities to meet. And back in Odessa, I said that in the final count, we need this humanitarian Rammstein platform. The same goes for reconstruction issues, but localization of humanitarian aid might become one of the areas. I mean, who should be there? Representatives of governments, governmental organizations like USAID, UN, large implementers, representatives from Ukraine, likewise. So these studies have to be presented on an ongoing basis for having the fuller picture of what's happening. And in this way, we'll be accommodating towards each other from the standpoint of procedures. This may also be done at the national level, but I think at the international level, this will work better. Another wonderful thing, passportization will work perfectly. Thirdly, we need training. We need to develop our capacities, but that takes resources. Funding, firstly. Secondly, donors have at least reached a certain consensus concerning standards, because it's like in the Middle Ages when somebody falls ill and one midwife says you have to treat yourself like this, another witch doctor tells you this is another medication, and the third one says you're both wrong altogether. I don't want to downgrade anyone, but we never get one unified answer concerning what will be right, because for one donor one thing works well, for another one something else. I understand there's a diversity of procedures, but if we could somehow standardize and normalize them, at least come up with this passport, this eventually will so much facilitate and ease up our work, because all of the colleagues are ready to promote our capacities, but that requires resources, and we need to have understanding that we are not just wasting our resources when we repeat doing the same 5 times, for instance, in a variety of ways. Because eventually we will continue doing what we have been doing so far, and humanitarian aid will be provided, but with localization, we will be able to achieve so much more and better.
У нас ще мало бути 30 хвилин на закриття.
We also had to have 30 minutes for closure and conclusions, but Anna Duda has left for an urgent meeting, so I will do the wrap up in 2 minutes. And I think it's a bit overdue because it's 35 minutes past 5. So I was thinking, and I would what I would add for myself to the 14 points that we described, maybe we could shuffle and reshuffle and merge some of them together. So mostly we're saying that the donors, the INGOs, we urge them and plead them to engage in localization. But I would also add another plea, and that is to us, to local, national organizations, to volunteer movements. We have to be more proactive in that. If we are at least we hear that something, they have something good on the table, they have something interesting to offer us, but we also have to offer something on the table regarding coordination, localization, fundraising. So I would add this kind of recommendation, but in general, I would say that's the first attempt, and I think quite a successful one, an attempt to have this critical discussion. It was a little bit chaotic because we tried to squeeze it all in one day, but anyway, it's going to be a very good, how do I put it, a base level or foundation for us moving further next. So I didn't expect to have so many I didn't expect to have such a vibrant discussion. The organizers will later distribute a summary or a press release that will sum up everything that we've heard today. And I think subsequently it's going to be the roadmap that will give us some sort of waypoints where we're heading in terms of localization. And we're going to be thinking, maybe I like the notion of putting together the coordinational part of work, this big international coordination with many multi-layered coordination efforts in Ukraine. I want to thank you very much for your participation. It was very interesting to hear everything. The panelists were exceptionally great. The moderators also were great, did a great job. And interpreters, thank you. Thanks and see you all later.